welcome to the program. I'm Jofia Rogers in Lagos. We begin in Mali, where the country's army says 14 of its soldiers have been killed in 2 separate attacks in the center of the country, where Islamist militants are known to operate. In both incidents, vehicles in which the troops were traveling in were hit by roadside bombs. The army said it had deployed reinforcements following the attacks and had killed more than 30 of them. However, that claim has not been independently verified. Meanwhile, the United Nations has condemned the killing of 3 aid workers in 2 separate attacks in South Sudan. The acting UN humanitarian coordinator in the country, Peter Van Der, says the killings are completely unacceptable and must stop. 2 aid workers were shot and killed while on duty at a humanitarian facility when armed men attacked Rumamir village in Abyei, a border oil-rich area being contested by South Sudan and Sudan. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said in a press release that several civilians were also killed, adding that humanitarian supplies were looted during the incident. In a similar incident, an aid worker was killed by unknown individuals while he guarded humanitarian commodities in Duk County in Jonglei State in the east of the country over the weekend. And French authorities say a suspected attacker who stabbed and injured 6 people in Paris yesterday have been identified as a Libyan national aged in his 20s and was due to be deported. Police are still investigating the man's motive and has not been immediately made clear. A police spokesperson said the suspect was shot several times and was taken to hospital with serious injuries. Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin has praised the courage of 2 off-duty police officers who intervened to halt the attack. Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang says China stands ready to work with Africa to deepen Sino-African friendly relations and upgrade their cooperation in the new era. Speaking at a joint news conference with the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, Qin highlighted that this year marks the 10th anniversary since Chinese President Xi Jinping put forward the principles of China's Africa policy, which includes sincerity, real results, amity, and good faith. The Chinese foreign minister adds that over the past decade, the China-Africa relations have made historic strides, catching global limelight and rebooting a new era of forging a high-level China-Africa community with a shared future. Meanwhile, the Chinese foreign minister has debunked groundless allegations that China is creating a so-called debt trap on the continent, indicating that it's a narrative trap imposed on China and Africa. Qin says African countries have in recent years been actively working to promote economic and social development, but insufficient funding has become a major bottleneck to its prosperity and revitalization.
China is committed to helping Africa reduce the debt burden and actively participates in the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative. We have signed with most African countries on debt suspension and relief. We are working with countries to deal with the individual cases concerning Ethiopia, Chad, and Zambia. China has announced the exemption, the intergovernmental interest-free loans that expired at 2021 for African countries, and will transfer $10 billion worth of SDRs in the IMF to developing countries.
Meanwhile, China has inaugurated an $80 million headquarters for the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Present at the inauguration was the newly appointed Chinese foreign minister, who is visiting Ethiopia as part of a week-long tour of the continent. He was joined by the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed. According to Mr. King, the project was testament to the growing relations between his country and Africa. It was built and equipped by China. Beijing accelerated its involvement to tackle health crisis after the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014. In the meantime, a Nigerian policy analyst believes that the increased investment by Western countries in Africa is a validation of the China-Africa cooperation model, which largely focuses on investment in infrastructure and has been fruitful in spurring development across the continent. In a televised interview, Ovigwe Egwegu, an analyst at an independent African-led international development consultancy called Development Reimagined, made the remarks as he refuted groundless accusations by Western media that China's presence in Africa is debt trap diplomacy.
African countries have realized that the infrastructure model or the infrastructure investment model that China is taking in with Africa actually, is very positive for African development. And not just even African countries realizing that. You see that the G7's Partnership for Global Infrastructure Initiative, PGI, and even the European Union's Global Gateway all came after the BRI. And I will always argue that those two initiatives by Western countries were introduced because they have recognized the positive impact that infrastructure investment has created in developing countries. So in a way, it's a validation of China's approach. And that's why many African countries who have been arguing even before those initiatives were put out by Western countries continue to work more closely with China. If you even listen to what the Ethiopian Prime Minister said during the visit of the ongoing visit of Foreign Minister Shingang, he did say that there will be a strengthening of exchanges of governance experience between China and Ethiopia. And all of this is because of the fact that the countries have realized that when it comes to China-Africa relations, there is a model, and the model has been delivering, so far. So whether you're looking at for infrastructure, you're looking at trade, policy, policy coordination, financial inclusion, and people-to-people exchanges. So it's a very robust collaboration or cooperation.
Still on bilateral relations, the French and German foreign ministers have arrived in Ethiopia to support the peace agreements that's ended 2 years of fighting in the northern Tigray region. Germans Annalena Baerbock said the pair would be discussing the need for lasting peace and accountability, food security in the region, as well as wider partnerships between the European and African unions. Tens of thousands of combatants and Tigrayan civilians died during months of brutal fighting marked by numerous allegations of war crimes. And yet more diplomatic ties with Africa. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu began a 5-nation Africa tour with South Africa as his first trip. Developing bilateral relations and cooperation are part of the agenda of the visit, which will take him to Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Gabon, and Sao Tome and Principe. Mr. Cavusoglu was received by his South African counterpart, Dr. Naledi Pandor, who passed on her government's well wishes on the 100th anniversary of Turkey this year. Ahead of the proposed meeting of Russian and Ukrainian human rights commissioners meeting in Turkey tomorrow, the visiting minister was asked about the prospects of peace between both countries in conflict at this time.
We believe that this war will end at the negotiating table. Of course, sooner is better, and that is why we have been spending a lot of efforts. Actually, the general framework shaped in Istanbul back in March of last year. Of course, there are new parameters, new realities, and Russia says that it is ready for negotiations. And Zelensky proposed a 10-point peace plan, and we, as Turkey, we support that, and we are working on it. And we were asked actually to chair one or some of them. Actually, these are the areas that Turkey has been spending a lot of efforts. And despite the war, we proved that diplomacy pays off. Grain deal, I'm going to answer a question on that grain deal or fertilizer as well later on. And prisoners exchange and Zaporizhia talks. And there are many other talks have been going on in Istanbul, particularly that we have been hosting, facilitating, and brokering. What I mean that, yes, there is a war that we need to end this, but meanwhile, engagement with both sides will be useful and important to end this war. And on food security and supporting African people, yes, now we are facing serious problems. We discussed these crises and challenges that we have been facing during the meetings today. And food security, energy security are the two main of them. And the grain deal actually have been a kind of relief for the people and for the countries in need. And the wheat prices dropped by 8%, and the food price index fell by 9% after the grain deal.
Over in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the country's army has denied the presence of fighters from Russia's mercenary Wagner group in the country in response to claims by a rebel group. The army has been struggling to contain the M23 the rebel group that has in recent months captured swathes of territory in the eastern part of the country. Reports have suggested the presence of Russians in North Kivu province on government's invitation to help deal with the rebel group. The M23 spokesperson, William Gomez, says it's true. The Wagner group is here. We have evidence that we will show in due time. While the army spokesperson, Major General Sylvain Ekenge, has denied the claim, stating that the Wagner group is not operating in DR Congo. The unrest in eastern DR Congo has displaced hundreds of thousands from their homes. Meanwhile, spokesperson for the Secretary General of the United Nations had spoken against the decision of the Rwandan government not to accept DR Congo refugees. Briefing journalists, he said at least 18 civilians were killed in the DRC, including 17 on Sunday, and thousands have been displaced and are seeking shelter at a site in Rome.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo, our peacekeeping mission there, tells us they're conducting new patrols in the Rodrodo area of Jugu territory in Ituri province after a series of attacks by the Codeco militia. The mission reports that the situation is under control but remains tense. At least 18 civilians were killed, including 17 on Sunday. Thousands have been displaced and are seeking shelter at a site in Rome. It's not the fact that we have a UN mission. It's the fact that every member state has a responsibility to uphold international refugee law, to never force people back who are fleeing violence, and to ensure that they are given protection and given safety. And that applies to every member state. The M23 group, as far as we know, continues to operate. There are other groups. What we do know is that large parts of that area are not safe for people. People will seek safety wherever they can. It is incumbent on the authorities in the DRC, on the regional countries, including all of the DRC's neighbors, to work together to ensure that people in the DRC are safe and secure in their homes.
Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel, Giovanni Biha, says despite efforts by national security forces and international partners, insecurity has again deteriorated in large parts of West Africa and the Sahel. Addressing the United Nations Security Council via teleconference, she attempted to quantify the loss of the education sector in the region. The President of ECOWAS, Dr. Omar Toure, also addressed the Council on matters of elections and terrorism.
Despite efforts by national security forces and international partners, insecurity has again deteriorated in large parts of the region. As a consequence, more than 10,000 schools across the Sahel had to close, leaving millions of children unable to acquire the necessary skills to build their lives and their countries. This is in flagrant disregard of Resolution 2601, which condemns attacks against schools and demands conflict parties to safeguard the right to education. Furthermore, nearly 7,000 health centers were forced to shut down due to the activities of armed groups, violent extremists, and criminal networks.
Beyond the three countries in transition, ECOWAS continues to support member states in the conduct of elections. Currently, preparations for the upcoming elections this year have seen the engagement of ECOWAS with key institutions and stakeholders in the various member states. Since 2009, and particularly after 2012, the Lake Chad Basin and Central Sahel have emerged as the epicenters and incubators of terrorism and violent extremism, initially homegrown in the case of Boko Haram in Nigeria, but steadily incorporated into the two global terrorist franchises, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State.
Former Nigerian ambassador to Spain, Ademola Seriki, who died recently, has been honored at an occasion of a posthumous delivery ceremony of the Spanish Civil Merit Awards. The award was delivered by His Excellency Jose Manuel Alvarez, Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of the Kingdom of Spain. The award was received on behalf of the family by his wife, Mrs. Wasilat Seriki, and son, Mr. Wale Demola Seriki.
Ambassador Seriki by
Back here in Nigeria, residents of Jos, the Plateau State's capital, are experiencing extreme weather conditions, which is taking its toll on their day-to-day activities. The weather conditions, which began in December last year, has been getting colder continuously and climaxed in early January with temperatures as low as 9 degrees Celsius, forcing the people to keep themselves warm in order to avoid any health conditions associated with the Harmattan season. Take a look.
3,993 feet above sea level and surrounded by rocks and stones, Jos climate is more temperate than other cities in Nigeria and even quite cold due to the high altitude and other features. A climatologist and head of Department of Geography and Planning at the University of Jos, Professor Bimbal Nankam, explains the atmospheric conditions that lead to the extreme weather conditions.
By this time of the year, the sun is overhead in the southern hemisphere, that's Tropics of Capricorn. So automatically it means the low pressure cell will shift to the south. And you know where the low pressure cell is, that is where the zone of rising air, because naturally where the sun is overhead, maximum solar intensity will be exerted there. And when air is heated, it becomes light. When it's light, it turns to rise. So naturally, air from colder, dense area will flow to take the part. You know, there's this geographical dictum that says the higher you go, the cooler it becomes. Exactly. So the altitude of the plateau enhances that cooling more than the normal surrounding.
With the low temperatures come some health challenges if the body is not well protected against the harsh weather.
One of those things that it does is to increase the rate of upper respiratory tract infections, because it's dry and dusty. It carries a lot of particles in the atmosphere, and people tend to inhale it and tend to come down with a lot of upper respiratory tract infections, cough, catarrh, nasal discharge, or that what we call catarrh, you know. And then also, it can also has impact on the skin.
So the residents do what they can to stay warm.
You just have to have your jacket, very thick blankets, and as normal, we don't bath every day like that.
Like me, I used to wear 3 clothes, singlet and normal t-shirts with one big jacket and scarf. Sometimes I used to wear mats because of this cold.
Keep your children in check, ensure they wear their sweaters. If possible, you put their caps for them on. So once the sun comes out, they can actually remove it. So but I think they need it. Sometimes you see kids going around without jackets and you'll be like, are these children really coming out from homes? So I feel it will be good when they keep their kids.
With the Harmattan season still around till the end of January, residents and visitors alike should endeavor to always put on warm clothing and avoid cold drinks or anything that can complicate their system, as advised by medical personnel.
And finally on the program, 3 years of drought has dried up Tunisian reservoirs, threatening harvests that are critical to the North African country's battered economy and pushing the government to raise tap water prices for homes and businesses.
Climate change has accelerated, bringing blistering heat across the Mediterranean region in recent summers, as winter rains have repeatedly diminished in North Africa, causing problems for agriculture from Morocco to Tunisia. At the Sidi El Barak Dam in Nafza, 140 kilometers west of the capital Tunis, the dry ground behind the dam is cracked, with trees slowly dying, the result of another failure of rainfall. Empty dams across the fertile northern hills and eastern plains are alarming farmers who produce crops of olives and wheat that once made Tunisia a breadbasket to the ancient world. Olive oil is still the country's most important export. In the rural region of Siliania, farmer Hatim Nafaudi is filling his tanker truck with water from a depleted dam, confusion and gloom on his face.
The idea of watering trees in the winter, this was an impossible thing to make happen. But now, we're in January, and I've watered my plants for the 4th time because the autumn season was dry.
The drought has pushed up fodder prices, contributing to a crisis for Tunisia's dairy industry, as farmers sell off herds they can no longer afford to keep, leaving supermarket shelves empty of milk and butter. As the government tries to prioritize grain staples and export crops, it has urged farmers to stop irrigating vegetable fields with water from dams. In a further urgent measure, authorities have also in some cases limited supply to farms to make sure there will be enough drinking water for homes and businesses.
It is time to declare a state of water emergency because all indications show that if we remain silent, then thousands of families will be thirsty and deprived of drinking water. So we must declare a water emergency.
Economy Minister Samil Said says Tunisia is preparing studies for new dams and seawater desalination plants for development between 2023 and 2025. Officials are also contemplating more extensive rationing.
That's Network Africa today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joka Rogers.